You're listening to the Inside Podcast Network. Podcasts for the enterprise.
Hello, this is Lee and Pete for Inside the Microsoft Cloud. This is day one, the official day one of the Microsoft Ignite conference. It's May the 4th. And there's so many announcements today, Pete. I'm having a really hard time. We have some notes up here, but there's been so much announced. Pete, why don't you just give us a quick rundown of how the day kind of started off?
My gosh, so the day started off, I felt like I spent a day in the keynote. In the first 2 hours, we had so many announcements, right? So we have announcements that range from enterprise client and user experience, a lot of focus there. We heard announcements in the data center space where a lot of our audience tend to focus, and then we heard some announcements purely on the public cloud side of the house, but there were just a great many. So let's just run through, let's start with enterprise client because that's kind of where Satya started. So he started with the announcement of the face of updates changing as we know it with Windows Update for Business. So,
yep.
And to be fair, the announcements I think were intentionally fairly light on the details because the detail will come through the course of the week. So we heard Windows Update for Business. We heard not long after that mention of the Operations Management Suite. So a single control plane for managing our virtual machines, our clouds, not just management, deployment, etc. Which when articulated at slightly greater depth means managing on-prem resources, managing Azure resources, VMware, Amazon, etc. So there's potentially going to be some real spread there across the data centers as we know them.
Yeah, and something I'd like to stress is when we talk about that keynote, I was actually doing some booth staffing earlier today, and we had a lot of people coming up, well, where's the details on Windows updates? Where's the details on the OMS? And they're just not there yet. We actually, I think in a few minutes, we have another session going into detail downstairs here today. But like we said, we're more or less just giving you the overview of the day one, the topics here.
That's really what it's all about. We heard a reference to SQL 2016, and I actually saw SQL 2016 from a couple of different angles in terms of vague details. So we heard today that with SQL 2016, we're going to be able to take a table within a database and stretch that table from an on-prem copy into Azure. What does that mean? It means exactly what I told you there. So a SQL MVP tweeted to a friend of mine who shared, he said, I'm really excited about SQL 2016, and I don't mean really excited with air quotes. I'm actually really, really excited. So he said this is a big deal. So we'll have to see a little more about what that means as the week progresses. We pretty quickly into the talk heard about Office 2016, right? I think we kind of knew that was coming. So the Office 2016 preview was announced. They posted the notes over on the blog. Folks were invited to come down to the main area of the conference and to download and install. Yeah, I was one of those people. So
yeah, Pete installed the 2016 preview on his laptop, and now he's telling me that Outlook won't launch. So
well, it was good mostly. A lot of it's working, but to be fair, I'm running build 10074 of Windows 10, right? So I have preview on top of preview, so I have myself to thank for that. I'm welcome. So just going through the client side of things, we heard a lot about user experience across devices. So one of the speakers made the point, he said, it's not the devices that are mobile, it's you that's mobile, and your experience needs to be consistent across those. And so we heard reference to Continuum again and saw a demo that I think first came out. You mentioned at Build, yeah?
Yes, now Continuum is a demo at Build, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is when more or less you connect a mobile device, like a phone, I think the phone in this case, a Windows phone, to an HDMI port, and then more or less the interface that you see on the output is Windows 10, using a Windows 10 machine. You don't have a condensed phone layout. It's an actual full kind of desktop interface that's more or less indistinguishable from Office on a desktop.
That's definitely an aspect of it. So with Continuum, he said the idea is that your user experience is going to be consistent across devices because the code base isn't just kind of similar. He said it's actually the same. And so he showed an Office document on a desktop, an Office document on a phone, and the layout was more or less consistent, accounting for some rejiggering because of the size of the device, right? But they were impressively similar, to be sure. So fair to say that there's some really exciting potential there. That HDMI capability Lee alluded to there, plug a phone into a desktop with a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, and he was effectively computing there. So, all hail the rise of the ARM processor. I imagine with Windows running on ARM devices that there are people at ARM that are just high-fiving in offices everywhere.
Yeah.
Computing on Windows with ARM has reached its peak. We heard Julia White mention Delve, which is a way in Office 365 of bringing information to you, as she put it. So I honestly hadn't laid eyes on Delve before today, so I think that was net new, to be sure. What else did we have on the desktop?
Did they touch on Sway at all? We're kind of talking about Delve.
Yeah, so they did touch on Sway a bit. So we saw the demo about kids in the education space. It really began. I really see Sway as something that's being pitched as something intuitive and exciting and new for millennials and younger audiences that are collaborating in maybe not in business ways. I mean, I can look at Sway and say, yeah, I could build a business presentation, but they're really going outside those bounds of what you would do with a business PowerPoint and talking about use case scenarios that don't actually involve business and might be awkward for PowerPoint in some cases. I think kids build PowerPoints now, but Sway looks to be a more intuitive and fluid way for people to express ideas, for sure. What else did we have? So on the UX side, on the user experience side of things, those were the highlights, I think.
I think so.
So let's move into data center. Let's not move into data center. Let's talk about cloud. For you System Center people, we're going to save the System Center piece to last. So on the cloud side of things, we heard a bit of mention of the some of what was released at Build last week, right? So there was a lot of data about Azure coming out last week with Elastic Database, with infrastructure as a service v2, so to speak. So. And then the micro, the new services fabric. And that services fabric is kind of the transition point for the announcement that came out today. So we heard about Azure Stack for the first time. And actually, if you want to see a good description of Azure Stack in plain English, you want to go over to ZDNet and look at Mary Jo Foley's sort of articulation of that. Mary Jo's great about boiling it down. So she says Azure Stack is a combination of Server 2016, Azure Pack, and Azure Service Fabric. So basically, it's a set of features that Microsoft's going to make available to hosting providers and enterprise, so they can run that on top of Windows Server and System Center. So this, to me, looks like the evolution of Windows Azure Pack. So now we're seeing WAP starting to evolve and grow in interesting ways here, and in a lot of ways it is similar to the CPS, the cloud platform system that was released not too long ago on Dell gear. So it all feels the same. Has that same feeling to it, but it to me it feels like WAP a little more polished. I didn't see anything that's going to bridge immediately that service management gap where we can tie back to our ITIL processes, but we're spreading the footprint and heading in that direction.
Yeah, again, and this is another one of those things where they flat out said that the preview of Azure Stack will actually be available later this summer. Another common theme, another product being lots of things coming out this summer. There's going to be a lot of homework for guys like us to do this summer, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So right along with that, so we mentioned that Azure Stack is based on Windows Server 2016. So preview coming this summer. Lots of talk about what's interesting in Server 2016. So an operating system that's going to incorporate elements of auto-scale and self-healing for services. Containers, front and center, right? So we heard about support for Docker on Windows. So there's a Docker client for Windows now. So Microsoft's taking, Docker seems to have just exploded, and so now the Docker experience will come to Windows. We'll have the Nano version of Windows. So imagine Server Core, only even smaller. So the first demo I saw of Nano was a 93% reduction in footprint, something like a 3-minute deploy time, something ridiculously fast. It's going to be a headless version managed with tech like PowerShell desired state config. So not your typical GUI install. So in this talk today, they talked about, there was a mention of flavors of containers. So there's Windows Server containers, which is a new isolated OS environment for server apps. There's Hyper-V containers, which is an isolated version of the Hyper-V environment for cloud deployment for Windows and Linux. So for me right now, I can't distill this with absolute clarity. I think we need to see a little more detail this week to see what it looks like. There are a couple of Azure sessions on my to-do list, and a couple of Nano sessions on my to-do list that are going to help me get down, I think, into the guts of containers here and understand exactly what those flavors are so we can articulate what's Docker, what's not Docker, what's running in Nano, what's not running in Nano, etc. So lots of reading there. So we'll try to wrap up some show notes to go with this. There are definitely some mention of all this out on the common sources, Ars Technica, ZDNet, etc. But today those sources are going to have about as much detail as we have based on what we heard in the session. So Server 2016, I believe we heard preview this summer.
Yes.
Azure Stack available later this summer. And then the big one for the data center for our audience, System Center. So System Center 2016 had its mention today. And we heard some particulars about the improvements planned for 2016. So I have to say the list for improvements in System Center 2016 didn't seem really, really long to me.
No, it can be, at least what they talked about today, summed up with, they had some interesting facts on Linux management. So they did spend some time talking about DSC configuration support for Linux in System Center, which
to me translates to the configuration manager client being extended to support desired state configuration or settings management, as we call it in Config Manager 2012. So certainly not to be confused with PowerShell desired state configuration, which already exists for Linux, but there's no pull server there today. So I don't want to get into the guts of PowerShell DSC if you're not in that vein yet. But this sounded like System Center specific extension of the configuration manager client, and just enhanced instrumentation of operations manager for monitoring the LAMP stack. So meaning native Microsoft Linux Unix monitoring capability. Expanding in terms of feature set. They were talking about built-in native SSH support to drive scripted management tasks. So it sounds like we're going to get some steps in the direction of manageability like we have in Windows, where I can highlight machines and I can do things to those machines. Time will tell. So we heard the preview for System Center. Is on a much more aggressive timeline. I believe later this week. Did I understand that correctly?
I'd have to check the dates, though, and I know there's at least some components there that I feel like they're rushing a bit more just to support Windows 10 when it comes out. Like I know we talked about in the past, heavy updates for Configuration Manager just to support Windows 10, just so we can drive adoption of 10.
So that's a really good point. So I heard System Center 2016 preview releasing this week, so maybe not with all of those features we heard about, maybe just some extra bits to support getting that client deployed to the latest Windows builds, which makes pretty good sense, I think. So, and they mentioned that the System Center preview would include some new software-defined networking capabilities as well. So basically, to support what they called new common data center workloads, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, monitoring capabilities for Office 365 and Azure. So I think we'll just have to wait and see what that looks like when it comes out. So again, prepare to do your homework. So hopefully you have a good data plan at home. Just kind of looking through the list here. We are sitting here with our PCs, just hitting the highlights to make sure that we cover all the announcements. A massive amount for a keynote that ran approximately 2 hours.
2 hours, yeah.
So I felt like every time I turned around, I'm excited to announce.
Yes.
So it did not disappoint. So I felt like after Build and all of the announcements we saw around Azure at Build that there was going to be so little to talk about here. Wow. Not at all the case. So definitely big changes coming for enterprise client from, patching to user experience, to the data center. Just wait 15 minutes and something new will come.
Something new. Always something new.
So I think Mary Jo the other day tweeted that Scott Guthrie said 500 new services for Azure in the last few months. So it's just a mind-blowing pace. So Microsoft has what did I see in the New York Times? Microsoft has a far-out vision. So what I feel like today is we're getting the real meat of what's coming. So last week we heard all about HoloLens. So the first full day of Build, I don't think I saw a tweet that didn't include HoloLens or a reference to HoloLens. The demos blew people away, and they had a few hundred test devices here. So no HoloLens at Ignite. Lots of good announcements and promises of sessions this week that will help us dive down. I think, in fact, the operations management suite, I saw something flash on a screen down there that told me they were going to be doing a little session down there in the expo tonight.
That's right.
And this is just day one, so I think we'll be back with announcements day 2 tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely right. Pete, you just mentioned that there's going to be some sessions. There's actually a welcome reception down in the expo going on right now, so we're actually going to pack up here in a minute and head down there. And of course, our coverage of Ignite is going to continue. Again, this is day 1. We should have kind of a daily wrap-up as well as some content throughout the days. Earlier today, we had a really, really great session with Corey Sanders. It was so great we were able to grab him. Product group manager on the cloud, Azure Cloud, kind of manages the infrastructure as a service side.
If you're an IT pro that deploys virtual machines to Azure or has been thinking about deploying virtual machines to Azure, you need to catch our 15 minutes with Corey today, because it's going to change the way you deploy virtual machines to Azure. And it is game-changing in the most exciting way. I've not been this excited about an Azure announcement in a very long time. So I watched a session on this from Build last week, and I closed that session down, and I went out and immediately started working with it. It's 6 months from now, we will be looking back at this wondering how we ever survived with Azure IaaS V1, because V2 is powerful. So catch that session for sure.
And again, day 1 coverage, just going over what we saw at the keynote. There's still a lot of details to be flushed out, a lot more content coming through the coming week, so make sure you stay tuned to InsideTheMicrosoftCloud.com. You're going to see a lot from Pete and myself throughout the week.
Hopefully.
So, thanks, Pete.